Session. Go. That was well timed. Welcome everyone to our Envirothon special topic training. It is renewable energy for a sustainable future. There are so many of you dropping your name in the chat box right now. I'm really very appreciative. This is giving our speakers this afternoon a little bit of background on our audience, and excited that I've got Envirothon students, coaches, district staff supporting, all really on the line today to learn a bit more on how we can grow the Envirothon program, specifically around our special topic this year. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Dr. Kendall Tyree. I'm the executive director of the association. Shannon Mitchum is next to me. She's our operations coordinator. And I'm really excited to announce that we have a new education and outreach coordinator who started with us this past Monday, Byron Menson. Many of you may be connecting with her one-on-one, learning more about the association and foundation's role in Envirothon and our other programs, and she's really hit the ground running. Byron, did you want to mention a little bit about your own background and how you came here?
Yeah, I graduated from Roanoke College with a degree in biology and then worked kind of in the more technical laboratory area of science for a little bit. But I always really wanted to get into the education world. I have a lot of experience working with Comfort Zone Camp, the nonprofit in Richmond, if anyone is familiar with it. So I'm super excited for this education role and just really excited to be in this world.
It is certainly not the first or last time that you're going to hear from Byron. We're thrilled to have her on board. She will drop her email address in the chat box for you so that you can reach out to her directly with any of your Envirothon questions. And she'll be certainly working with our local soil and water districts to support and grow the program. I know we have a really tight time frame for the next hour, so I'm going to dive right in. I want to introduce our speakers today. It is a privilege to work with Dominion Energy for the Envirothon program, and they've allowed such growth for our Dominion Energy program for Envirothon over the last number of years. This year's special topic really folded in well with their support at a different level, being renewable energy for a sustainable future. And when we had a gap in hiring for our education coordinator and really needed to lean in and find a trainer for our special topic at the statewide level, it was no hesitation to know that Dominion could really step in and offer us some really great training resources for students. And for that, I'm thankful that we've got three phenomenal speakers here with us today. You're going to be hearing from Jason Erickson, the Director of Environmental Services at Dominion Energy, and Jean Bradford, Environmental and Sustainability Specialist at Dominion Energy. Morgan Vickery from their team is also on today to give you a bit of resource knowledge. Jason Erickson is an environmental professional with 20 years experience in environmental planning, permitting, consulting, and regulatory support. He leads a team obtaining environmental permits and planning for energy projects, including offshore wind, solar and storage, electric transmission and distribution, and natural gas distribution for Dominion Energy. Jason, Jean, Morgan, I can't thank you enough for being here and providing us insights to really help our students prepare for our state competition and the international competition this coming July. So with that, I will pass it over for y'all to give a little bit of a better background and introduction than I did, and then to dive into our special topic.
Gina, I can go first. Again, Jason Erickson with Dominion Energy. I'm really excited to be here. I've been with Dominion for 14 years, and during that time, happy to answer questions from folks, but I've had the opportunity to really touch all parts of what Dominion does on an environmental front. I've been involved in power generation, all types of generation, renewable and traditional natural gas, coal, nuclear, renewable natural gas, hydro. I've had the opportunity to do all of that. Then I've had the opportunity to do electric transmission and distribution, how we deliver energy. So it's a really, energy is a really neat place to be involved in the environmental field, because it has the opportunity to provide a critical resource while protecting the environment. And prior to that, I worked for the state, worked for Virginia DEQ and the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, that a lot of you all are familiar with. And prior to that, worked for a geotechnical engineering company. And I have a geology background and a hydrology background in college and master's. So looking forward to talking to y'all. Jean?
Hey there, I'm Jean Bradford. I've been at Dominion about 3 years, and I work in the solar environmental due diligence, which means I'm responsible for reviewing and managing environmental field studies prior to solar project permitting and construction. And I'll get more into the environmental field studies a little bit later in our presentation. Prior to Dominion, I worked at Virginia DEQ in their Virginia Water Protection Program. And prior to that, I worked in environmental consulting, performing field studies and writing reports, mostly on wetlands, plants, and birds. My background in education is biology and environmental science. I went to William & Mary for undergrad and then grad school at Duke for a master's of environmental management. Go on, Morgan.
Sure. Hey, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Morgan Vickery. I'm a Senior Business Development Manager at Dominion Energy. My current role has me focused on small scale distributed energy resources, or DERs. Those are projects 3 megawatts and smaller, mostly solar projects at this point with some battery storage as well. I've been with Dominion for about 3 years. Before I came to my current role, I worked in the project construction division of Dominion Energy. That's the group that actually goes out and builds all of our company-owned renewable energy generation systems. I've been in the solar industry for about 20 years now. I got my master's in environmental management from the University of San Francisco with a focus on energy policy and renewable portfolio standards. I've worked for integration companies, done rooftop solar projects, carport projects, landfill projects, large scale and small scale ground mounted solar projects. I've worked for technology companies and engineering consulting firms. So happy to share my experience and knowledge, and look forward to your questions.
Folks, before they dig into the presentation you see on your screen, I dropped in your chat box too, between our speakers, between the solar and energy storage program, before we shift to offshore, we'll pause at that point and answer your questions. So during Ms. Bradford or Mr. Vickery's presentation, be dropping your questions in the chat box or any insights you might want from them, and we'll pause in between. Byron will be keeping an eye on the chat box to make sure we cover that. Then we'll do our next presentation. We'll try to cover the chat box at that point too. And then at the end, with time permitting, we'll see if any of you want to come off mute and really engage and discuss with our presenters further. So with that, thank you so much, Jean and Morgan.
All right, everyone. Can everyone see my screen? I guess you guys can. I'm sharing my screen, so you guys can see it. All right, we will be giving a training on the Dominion Energy Solar and Energy Storage Program today. First, we're going to go into a little program background, and the logical place to start is the Virginia Clean Economy Act, or the VCEA. The Virginia Clean Economy Act is a piece of clean energy legislation that Governor Ralph Northam signed into law on April 11, 2020. The act is designed to spur clean energy job creation and reduce the state's carbon emissions, primarily by expanding wind and solar power. The VCEA has established Virginia as a national leader in the fight against climate change as the first state in the South to set a 100% clean energy standard and commit to a zero carbon electricity grid. The Virginia Clean Economy Act's goals include spurring economic growth through jobs and investments, and protecting consumers through energy savings and efficiencies. Outcomes will include provide cleaner air and fight climate change by eliminating carbon emissions and removing air pollution due to emissions from fossil-fired power stations.
All right, so the next slide here gets a little bit more detailed on all the different components of the Virginia Clean Economy Act. This was the most consequential energy policy reform in the Commonwealth of Virginia since the 2007 Re-Regulation Act. We can talk about regulated versus non-regulated utility environments later on if you're interested. Some of the major provisions of the Act are creating this mandatory renewable portfolio standard that essentially says when and how Dominion Energy and other investor-owned utilities in the state must transition to energy sources, generating sources that are considered renewable energy. We also committed to retirement of carbon-emitting electric generating units. Those are power plants that use coal or natural gas or biomass, other carbon emitting fuel sources. We also participate in a regional carbon trading program that enables Dominion to, trade for the value of the renewable energy that we are producing. So here are four sub-elements of the Clean Economy Act. Offshore wind, which Jason's going to talk about in a lot of detail later, so I'm not going to go too far into that. You can see some of the numbers here. Energy storage, 2.7 gigawatts by 2035. I thought this might be a good time to get into just a brief discussion about some of the terminology that you see on this slide. So when we're talking about a watt, a watt is a single instantaneous measurement of power or electricity, okay? So if you have a 100-watt light bulb, that means that that light bulb in any instant is requiring 100 watts of electricity in order to light up the bulb. So similarly, we talk about the capacity or generating capacity of our power plants, as well as the cumulative capacity as we aggregate all of the different energy sources. So when our previous utility model really relied on a lot of large generators, the fossil fuel plants. In our transition to a clean economy, we're seeing far more generating units or locations that all cumulatively add up to the numbers that you're seeing here. So for energy storage, primarily battery energy storage, 2.7 gigawatts by 2035. So that is 1,000 megawatts is 1 gigawatt. 1 megawatt is 1,000,000 watts, just to give you some idea of scale here. Solar and offshore wind, 16.1 gigawatts by 2035, including a carve out for small scale and brownfield sites. Brownfields, if you're not aware of that term, refers to previously used sites where there was some sort of pollution that occurred on that site. And that's definitely a focus for the company under the VCEA. Landfill sites, or we've got some previously used coal mining sites that would classify under that carve out. You see here in both energy storage and the solar and onshore wind category that we're talking about power purchase agreements, 35% of these coming from third parties under power purchase agreements. That's where Dominion doesn't actually own the generating source, like the solar panels or the wind turbines, but instead are simply buying the power from another company that owns those generating sources. So as you think about ways to do your planning for your project, these are a couple of the different ways, and the handout that we have later will break it down even further into kind of different setups. We also have an energy efficiency standard included in the Virginia Clean Economy Act, which is really important, to try to do the best we can to kind of control the demand we have for electricity at the same time that we're providing new clean generating sources. So I think you can go into the next slide, Gene.
All right. So the Grid Transformation and Security Act of 2018 is an act that influences our battery storage program. It addresses the battery storage pilot programs, which is 30 megawatts of, it requires 30 megawatts of battery storage pilot programs. And the project-specific objectives include improved reliability, improved integration of renewables, deferred investment in generation, transmission, or distribution, reduced need for additional peak generation, and connection to customer facilities. And so you're looking at here, it's labeled the DEV Energy Storage Roadmap, Dominion Energy Virginia is DEV. So, this graphic illustrates the legislation and megawatt goals timeline for the battery storage program at the company. So you see under the Grid Transformation and Security Act, established the pilot program, 30 megawatts required at this time. We're implementing 4 pilot projects totaling 7 megawatts. Then it goes to the Virginia Clean Economy Act in 2021. As Morgan covered, the Virginia Clean Economy Act's goal is 2,700 megawatts of energy storage by 2035. And you can kind of see the incremental goals there. And then today, 2024, the DEV energy storage program, that's kind of the stage it's at now.
All right, I think this is my slide, right, Gene? We've got a nice little chart here and a graphic showing the location of our energy storage facilities that are either in operation or in development and construction. So you can see that the thing to take home here is we have a long way to go in order to reach our goals. And so there's a lot of opportunity for, deployment of new technologies that can result in cost reductions or economies of scale that result in cost reduction and incorporation of lessons learned from previous projects. So when it comes to energy storage as well as solar, you'll see that there is a large demand for a shift to these new clean generating sources. And here's a little something that will just tell you a little bit more about the technology and what this stuff looks like. So over on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see Dominion Energy's Dry Bridge Energy Storage project, which is in Chesterfield County. This system at peak output generates 20 megawatts AC. And as you can see in the chat, Jason has reminded us that about 1 megawatt can power 250 homes. So I'll let you all do the math on that. I'm sure you can figure it out. An interesting bit of terminology here is we've got energy now entering the description of our renewable energy system. So as we talked about before, power is an instantaneous measurement, and energy is a measurement of that instantaneous power over time. So this 20 megawatt AC battery energy storage system can, if it's fully charged, it can run for 4 hours continuously, which gives us 80 megawatt hours. It's a lithium ion based battery system. That's the same kind of battery that's in your smartphones and your laptops. The main components include the smallest cell, of which many make up a module, and you have modules that are then put onto a rack, and then you have a number of racks that are set into each enclosure. Each enclosure has its own battery management system that handles the charging of the batteries, and then the power flows out from the batteries as direct current and is inverted using a power conversion system into AC electricity to put onto the grid.
All right, so this is my slide. So this shows kind of location of our solar portfolio right now and what states they're located in. So we have, we are mostly on the East Coast, but we do have some in California. And then I included here, the breakdown that you usually see of the two different types of solar projects, what we break them into generally. So you have utility scale solar projects, which is 20 megawatts plus, and then small scale solar projects, which are 3 to 20. And we group them in that fashion most of the time. You can have solar projects that are much larger than 20 megawatts, but that's just kind of our delineation.
And here we see a similar map to the one we saw before for battery storage, but this indicates where our solar projects are currently located throughout the Commonwealth. Dark green being in operation, about 2.1 gigawatts, and in development and construction, another 7.2 gigawatts. Dominion Energy's service territory map actually looks a lot like the map that you're seeing right here. That's because it makes more sense for us to site our projects within our service territory where our transmission and distribution grid already exists. And here's a little snapshot of what a ground-mounted solar PV system looks like. You can see, and we'll start to get into some of the environmental aspects of it here. Around the number one, we have our environmental controls. So before site preparation begins, environmental protections such as sediment basins, silt fences, and other controls are installed throughout the property to manage stormwater runoff and prevent soil erosion. And then two, site preparation happens. Trees are removed where needed. The land is then graded to, a proper grade that can handle the installation of the racking equipment. And then we'll also build roads and install fencing. Then at number three, you see the solar installation itself. So posts go into the ground typically, unless you're talking about a landfill where you can't penetrate the cap of the landfill. The racking system is either fixed tilt where it's at one tilt angle all the time, 24/7, or where you have a tracking system that will tilt east or west depending on the time of the day. And then number four, we have our grid connection that takes the power from the solar arrays through the inverter all the way to the electric grid. And then throughout the construction process, the site is revegetated with grasses and plants and specialty erosion controls to stabilize the soil. This is a photo of our IV landfill project, currently under construction. This is a photo simulation where you can see the previously capped landfill with really pretty solar array on top.
All right, so now we're going to get into specific site development considerations that we have to think about. I'll first talk about environmental site development considerations. I could talk for hours about this, but I'll try to keep it short because of our time. So wetlands and streams are present on most of our sites. We perform and require wetland delineations. And a wetland delineation is just what it sounds like. It's an exercise to map the boundaries of jurisdictional surface waters, which include wetland streams and open waters. We plan our sites to avoid and minimize impacts to surface waters to the greatest extent applicable, practicable, but which requires accurate boundaries to plan around. If surface waters are unavoidable, we would need to obtain an impact permit. So Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act resource protection areas, also known as CBPA RPAs, are only applicable in the tidewater counties of Virginia draining to the Chesapeake Bay, which is roughly east of 95. And this is enforced by localities and is generally a 100-foot riparian buffer off of perennial streams and adjacent wetlands. RPAs have development restrictions and we avoid them where possible. T&E, or threatened and endangered species, or T&E species. There are a few agencies we coordinate with to address T&E species, which include U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources, and Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation. U.S. Fish and Wildlife is the federal regulatory agency for all federally listed species. DWR, our Department of Wildlife Resources, is the state listed, regulates the state listed animals, and then DCR, our Department of Conservation and Recreation, regulates the state listed plants and insects. The due diligence stage involves desktop searches and preliminary coordination with these agencies, as well as field surveys for habitat or species presence. The species we need to coordinate on is dependent on the location of the site and habitat present or the habitat to be impacted by the development. A good example of T&E that we have to deal with on almost all our sites is bats, like the northern long-eared bat. And because most of the sites in Virginia, it comes up as potentially present, and its habitat is basically all trees. So that's one we always have to consider, or usually have to consider. Natural heritage resources, that's something else that needs to be considered. Those can be state listed plants and insects or rare species and habitats, and we would know what those were through comments from DCR when we coordinate with them. Cultural resources include both archaeological resources and architectural resources. We perform and require surveys to evaluate the resources, which are called Phase 1 cultural surveys. We can coordinate these surveys with the Virginia Department of Historic Resources, or DHR, for concurrence. We also coordinate with DHR to determine potential impacts to resources and if mitigation for impacts may be required. We plan our sites to avoid and minimize impacts to cultural resources to the greatest extent applicable. Usually, if impacts to resources are proposed, it's a situation where we're altering the viewshed of an architectural resource. So examples of mitigation for an impact may be planting an additional buffer planting to obscure the view of the panels from the resource, a donation to a historical society, or an intensive level documentation study of the resource for the public record. Conservation areas are generally areas that have development restrictions on them, which we need to avoid. And then finally, hazardous waste sites are usually identified through the Phase 1 ESA study that is performed as part of site due diligence. Phase 1 ESAs will evaluate the site for recognized environmental conditions, also known as RECs, which would include hazardous waste or any other environmental concern on the site. So we can work to avoid or clean up or even pass on procuring a property due to the study's results. Phase 1 ESAs are also important from a legal standpoint prior to closing on a property to give us limited liability protection.
Okay, thanks, Gene. So here's some other site development considerations that you need to know about if you are developing a project or a group of projects in a particular region. So interconnection. Interconnection is a requirement for your generation source, whether it's solar, wind, battery storage, whatever, in order to be able to integrate into the existing electrical grid. So the most important thing to remember about that is it takes a lot of time these days to get your interconnection paperwork completed from the time that you originate the project or have a concept for it to the point to where you're actually be allowed to put electricity onto the grid from that project. There's lots of there's an interstate transmission organization called PJM that governs that for transmission projects, and then there's a separate queue for projects in Virginia. There's also local land use permitting considerations, right? So most of the land that you might find to site your new generation facility is probably not going to be zoned for that particular use. Now that's not all the time. You could find industrial areas or rooftops of buildings where you wouldn't necessarily have to change the land use, but if you're going to agricultural areas, farmlands, meadows, timber plots, you're probably going to be changing the land use from agriculture typically to a special use or a conditional use for a generating facility. The overall schedule, and I'll get into this on the next slide, is really important to consider and making sure that you've allotted enough time for all the different phases of your project, or also financing. So as I talked about before, we have Dominion or other utility-owned projects versus independent power producer or third-party projects. You got to know where the capital is going to come from in order to purchase your equipment, hire contractors to build your project, and there are a variety of mechanisms. You can do that from regulated utility projects like the ones that Gene and Jason and I mostly work on, which are rate-based. So all of the Dominion Energy ratepayers contribute to the upfront cost of those facilities. Also, some other physical considerations for your site: topography, subsurface conditions, geotechnical, whether the current use is a forest or a farm. A great place for, especially for solar or rooftops or parking lots that don't have a lot of the other problems or complications that I just mentioned. So here's just an example of one of our utility scale solar power plants. This one's currently being built in Richmond County, Virginia, out on the Northern Neck. You can see on the left, this is not a picture of this particular plant, but this is a typical aerial view of a solar power plant. And then yeah, there's just one more thing to point out here on the site plan for the Moon Corner project is the transmission line that's running right through the middle of the project. That's a really important part of siting and choosing location for a solar facility that's this large is to have a transmission line that is, either on the project or very close to the site.
I was just going to also add to this slide. This is also a good illustration of avoidance to wetlands and streams and the RPA buffers. So as you can see, the panels are avoiding to the greatest extent practical. I don't actually even see, there's some crossings from the lines, the electricity lines between them, but those could be bored and avoid impacts entirely.
Yeah, good point, Gene. And I think, and here's the last slide. This is a typical utility scale project construction schedule. And yeah, these things do take at least 2 years to go from beginning of engineering to placing the project in service. You have to account for all the engineering and permitting time, site mobilization, civil, mechanical, electrical work, and then commissioning the system, doing all the tests and inspection to make sure that it's going to operate safely and effectively before you place it in service.
All right, so I have a slide for closeout questions. I'm not sure if we should take time to answer questions now or wait until the end of Jason's presentation.
I would suggest waiting till the end of Jason's presentation. And in the event that we go later, we can always get the answer to these questions out in an email in the event that we go really late.
That sounds perfect.
All right. Are you able to share for me there, Kendall?
Yep, I'm pulling it up right now.
Awesome. All right. So as she's pulling that up, again, Jason Erickson, I have been working on this offshore wind project since 2020, so about 4 years. And I'm going to give you a kind of a background on the project, just what the project is, and then some of the kind of challenges or some of the just unique issues to an offshore wind project. And so just to kick us off here, these pictures on the front here, these are 2 turbines that were put in. This is our pilot project. We put these in 2020. So these are offshore Virginia Beach. They're about 27 miles offshore of Virginia Beach, and they are operating, and they are both 600 feet tall. They're each about 6 megawatts, a total 12 megawatts. So that's enough power for about 3,000 homes. And so these were built in coordination with the Commonwealth of Virginia to basically go through the process. These are the first that were put in the United States in federal waters. So it's hey, how do you physically do this? What are some of the issues that come in installing these? How do you go through the approval process for an offshore wind project? How do you minimize impacts? We did studies while we were putting these turbines in and how we minimize impacts to marine mammals. So we did this pilot project, and then you can go to the next slide. And we are developing a much larger project. I think Morgan and Gene talked about this Virginia Clean Economy Act calling for like 5.2 gigawatts. So that's enough power for 1.2 million homes. So these are big projects. And so we are now developing a large scale offshore wind project. This is the largest project being developed in the United States. It's the biggest project Dominion's ever built from a money standpoint. And so it's 176 turbines. So it's 27 miles off the coast. And in this map here, on the right, that's how we have these the turbines laid out. It's essentially in a grid. It's 27 miles off the coast. It's 113,000 acres. And kind of point of comparison, if folks have been to Lake Anna in Virginia, that's about 13,000 acres. So this is about 10 Lake Annas, if people have ever seen that. And then it has cables bring the power back to the beach, and then we have to connect the power to our grid. And Morgan talked a bit about for solar projects that you want to build a solar project where there's an electric transmission line. And so that's we have to not just get the power back to the beach, but we also have to get it to where we have big power lines to put it out to the folks that need it. So next slide there. I won't get into detail here, but the purpose, Morgan talked a bit about schedule. I think it's just important for folks when, your question, your problem is, how do we develop renewable energy? What are some of the considerations? And I mentioned these are big projects. And these are challenging things to do. It's new solar. We're getting better at it as an industry. Offshore wind is very new. So we bought this lease in 2013. We had decided to definitely do the project in 2019. And really started the work in 2020. So, I've been working on this for 4 years. We've been getting contracts in place. We've been working through getting the project approved. That it was approved. All the approvals were in place this past January. That's a big milestone. And then we've started construction, and we'll start offshore construction in earnest this year. And then that'll go on for about 2.5 years. And so just give you guys an idea of the scale of what these things are. From really starting the work to it being operational is going to be on the order of 7 years. So next slide, please. This is a schematic. This gives you an idea of what an offshore wind project is. So we have these turbines. I talked about them. The ones that we're putting in for this commercial project are 800 feet tall. So they're 200 feet taller than the ones that are out there now. They are sit on a monopile. So if folks have you've seen different types of towers before. This is just a very big steel pile or tube that is pounded, hammered into the seabed. So when you on the left there, you see these monopiles. So we'll go out there, we'll hammer it into seabed. We'll put another piece on top, and then we'll put the wind turbine generator with the blades on top of that. And then there are cables that we will be installing called inter-array cables, but these cables collect the power from 7 or 8 of these turbines and bring it to an offshore substation. So we're going to build 3 of these large facilities offshore that collects the power. And if people know a substation, if you've seen big transmission towers, you've seen big power lines, and then usually a lot of times on the side of a road, you'll see a fenced facility that these lines come into with a bunch of equipment. That's a substation. So we're building 3 big ones of those offshore. And then all that power will come back in 9 cables that are about a foot in diameter, and comes back 27 miles. They'll come back to the coast. We then drill underneath the beach to minimize impacts to the beach and to the community at the beach. And then we will build a new transmission line about 14 miles the way the crow flies to our existing grid. So that's really quick and dirty, but that's what a offshore wind project is. The next slide. I'm going to talk briefly about the onshore piece because all these projects, it needs to get the power to the grid, and so that's Morgan talked about historically we had these big facilities everywhere, big facilities that put a lot of energy, and you would have a limited amount of transmission. So you wouldn't have to put new power lines through people's property or through people's communities. And with renewables, offshore wind's a little different because it's still big, but a lot new transmission and a lot goes into that. And we're coming into Virginia Beach, which is a very developed area, and so a lot of energy went into making sure that the way we got that power to the grid impacted people and impacted natural resources to the least amount that we can. And this slide kind of goes over all the actions that we took to work with the community to identify that best route. So that map on the left there, we started with 16 routes, I think it was. We basically had a box. We need to get from point A to point B. Here's 16 ways we could do it. And then got a lot of input from all sorts of the community, including natural resource agencies and groups. That's kind of what I was responsible for. And we got a route that really did minimize impacts to people and resources. And I'd be happy to talk more about it, but that's a big part of the project there. So next slide, please. And this is what that route looks like. So we'll come onshore. And like I said, we'll drill under the beach, and then we'll go underground, which is not, you're used to seeing towers. Sometimes we can build these big projects underground. So we're doing that for 4 miles, which it's a lot more expensive and difficult to do that. But we're doing that for a number of reasons, including the fact that we're right by Naval Air Station Oceana, and they don't want big towers where the planes are flying. So when you do these projects, you got to take into all sorts of things into account. So, and we go there, we build a new facility, and then we come up above ground and go another 14 miles with new transmission lines. But we were able to co-locate it. So when we do anything, hey, can we use something that's already there? So we are building new towers where existing towers are. So we're minimizing impacts and natural resources and the community, which is important. Next slide, please. As we're kind of going from onshore to offshore, I mentioned that we are drilling underneath the beach. And so we just started, real big, pretty exciting, really. That picture on the left there is from February 29th. We started our offshore construction. So we are offshore there. We have a boat that you see those piles. It's jacked up, which means it has put feet on the ground, lifts itself up, and then that boat is essentially excavating a little bit, about 1,000 feet offshore. And in the middle picture there are machines that are onshore that are drilling underneath, pushing a casing, pushing a metal tube underneath. And then from the offshore piece, that boat out there is bringing a plastic pipe that will have the cables in it. And that's then being pulled through to the shore. So we did 3 of the 9 cable crossings there. What I have there on the left or on the far right is, this is new work. Anything we do, Morgan and Jean can tell you about things that have happened on solar projects that you don't anticipate and you got to deal with. And that's what you deal with kind of as environmental compliance and permitting stuff. So that is plastic that was a product. We didn't anticipate it would happen, but it was a product of how we installed these piles. So that was something that happened. We had to figure out how to make it not happen, how to clean it up real time. And that's just an example of the kind of thing that we do as environmental professionals on a regular basis. Question there is that, does it have negative geologic consequence? Is that what it is? Is that the question? Yep. So the short answer, I'm a geologist, so I like this one. We do a lot of geotechnical surveys. So for beginning in 2020, we had boats out there for, I think, on the order about 1.5 years that were, looking at what, making sure that we would minimize impacts to natural resources, but also that the geology and the sediment could handle our facilities. So we do a lot of work to make sure that there aren't negative impacts. And it did look like a snake. I saw that. It very much looked like a snake, but it was not. So moving on a bit, just give you an idea. I talked about it in that schematic, but those on the upper left there, those are the monopiles. They are about a football field long. They're about 30 foot in diameter. They're big. They come over from Europe. If you're driving in Norfolk, and I apologize, I got a barking dog. If you're driving in Norfolk anytime soon, you will look out. You can. They are there. They're being stored right now, and you can't miss them if you're driving through downtown Norfolk. So those come in. We then take them out. I mentioned that there was a piece that went on top. That's the yellow thing in the middle. That's called a transition piece. That's where when we are operating a facility, people get on it, and then the wind turbine generator comes back on top there on the right. And then that's a schematic, the lower left there of the offshore substation. And these, I'll send these out. These have stats. I think a lot of times numbers make sense. Hey, how big is it? How wide is it? How tall is it? How heavy is it? That's all there. I won't run through that, but we'll send it to you, and kind of gives you an idea of the scale. Just again, big project here with big facilities. Next slide there, please. So, kind of getting to what we do to minimize impact. So a real big concern for offshore wind is what impact it can have on marine mammals, on sea life. Marine mammals can be impacted by loud noises. So we are installing these turbines that is loud. Marine mammals can be impacted by vessel strikes. So if we are having more vessels going, that has the potential to impact marine mammals. And up and down the East Coast, I don't know if folks saw in the news over the last several years, but there have been more whale strandings, whales washing up dead up and down the East Coast since 2017 than there had been previously. And so there's a lot of effort going into minimizing the impacts of all industries, but particularly offshore wind on marine mammals. So a couple of things that I'll just highlight here. One is, I show that big vessel. We have, large vessels that will be handling our project. And we what is shown on the lower left there is areas. The real short story is that our project in offshore wind will have very restrictive vessel speed requirements. So we will not be able to go. We will have to go very slow during most of the year, up and down the East Coast. So anywhere where vessels for our project are supporting, we'll have to go slower than any container ships or anything like that. But we'll be driving very slow. We also have folks trained that look anytime a vessel's moving that look for marine mammals. Certain activities have the potential to impact mammals more, and the highest potential is when we install those monopiles. So when we're pounding those into the ground, that noise can hurt, can physically impact mammals if they're too close, but it also can change how they behave. And so the boat on the right there, if you see it, that's installing a monopile, and it's really hard to see in this picture, and I apologize for that, but there you see ripples that are moving in a circle around it. So we are installing a bubble curtain. We tested it during our project, and it's industry standard now. So we put bubbles that put equipment on the bottom of the ocean that pushes bubbles up that disturbs the sound, so it minimizes the sound that gets out. And that's a requirement, and we do that to minimize impacts. We also have folks both folks visually and technology that are looking for mammals, and we have to look before we start the work. Within certain distances, if we see mammals while we're working in certain distances, we have to stop. So a whole, I'm dumbing it down here, but there's a whole series of things that we have to do to minimize impacts from marine mammals. Next slide there. Offshore wind, they're wind turbines. These things are moving. These are moving pieces. And while we're 27 miles off the coast, we are away from a fair amount of shorebirds. We are in a migratory path up and down the East Coast. Eastern Shore, Virginia is a critical area for nesting for shorebirds. And so we, for our pilot project, we have been monitoring and working with William and Mary and with a number of environmental organizations to monitor for birds. And we're doing more of that. We've tagged birds. So we work with a number of groups to tag birds and see not just where they go, but at what height, so that we can minimize impacts to migratory birds. And we will, what I have on the right there is a map showing where we'll be putting additional monitors to make sure that we are minimizing, and if we do begin to have impacts on migratory birds, that we understand why and can make changes. Next slide there. So one thing you don't think about, an environmental professional, we also, and I know Gene and Morgan get into this, we evaluate the impact our projects can have on historical cultural resources. So I could go into detail there, but Virginia Beach has a number of registered historic sites and sites of cultural significance. And so you will be able to see these turbines in certain conditions. The pilot turbines that are out there now, they're a little bit shorter. You can see them in I've seen them twice with the bare eye. And only because I know where to look and I know what I'm looking at. If I told you to go down there and look for them, you'd be hard pressed to see them in any situation. But the taller ones, you will be able to see in certain situations. And so we had to evaluate what properties are going to be impacted by this, what's the impact, and how do we mitigate for that, right? We're changing the scenery. And on the right is First Cape Henry Lighthouse. If anybody's been down to Virginia Beach, I think it's 1790 lighthouse. George Washington was the surveyor for it. Very important place. You'll be able to see it. So we worked with them. What can we do? What are some improvements to your property that we can do to offset some of the impact that this change will have on the experience of visiting your facility? So just probably something that you might not have thought of that we had to deal with on this project. Next slide, please. And finally, we work a lot with commercial fisheries. So, this is a large facility. Those turbines out there, they'll be about 0.9 by 0.7 miles apart. So they're spread wide. But there still is an interruption to some extent for commercial fishing, and that's been it's a concern in Virginia. It's been a real big concern for New England, where a lot of the offshore wind development is occurring. Real concerns, real conflict related, between commercial fishing and offshore wind development. And so we have worked with the Virginia Institute of Marine Science, VIMS, which is William and Mary, part of William and Mary, to work with fishermen to minimize impacts. So we've been doing studies we'll be doing studies before our facility, during construction, and after. We have also worked with the Commonwealth of Virginia to we have a mitigation agreement that has essentially up to $40 million that would be provided to commercial fishermen if there are impacts to their livelihood. So again, something that you might not have thought that you kind of get into in an environmental career, but we are, and it's interesting stuff. So I think that is the end of my slides. And I know I ripped through that quickly, but Kendall, happy to answer questions now or have folks send them to you, whatever works for you.
Okay, sorry about that. Given the time constraints we have, if everyone's okay with it, we can email Jean, Jason, and Morgan all these questions. And once you guys have answered them, we will send them out to everyone that was on this Zoom. Along with that, I will also be posting to our website, and we'll send out an email and let you know of the PowerPoint presentations and also some information reference guides that we have.
With that being said, if anyone else has any other questions that they want answered, go ahead and throw them in the chat, and we will send those to be answered.
Does that work for everyone?
Works for me. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, it works for us. Appreciate it. Thank you, guys.
Okay. Thank you so much. That was great. I will stay on just for a moment in case some people are typing and want to get some questions in there. I'll just stay on for a minute or a couple minutes, and then we'll get working on those questions. One of us will get them out to you tomorrow.
Good luck on your projects. Thank you all.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Okay. All right, guys. Doesn't look like anyone else has any other questions. Again, we will get these out, and in the next couple of days, once they're answered, we'll get them out to anyone. Byron, did you put your email in?
I did, yes.
Yeah.
My email is in the beginning of the chat. I can drop it one more time just to make sure.
If anyone thinks of any questions and tomorrow, just email Byron and we will add that to the list of questions and then send them out. Okay, guys, thanks so much. And we will be in touch soon. Everyone have a great evening.